Kalen's boots crunched on shattered crystal, the sound echoing in the vast, silent amphitheater. Above, the alien sky was a bruised purple, streaked with the faint, dying embers of a star that had been extinguished millennia ago. He was the last of his team, the sole survivor of a mission that had been intended as a salvage operation, now reduced to a desperate fight for survival. His pulse rifle was a comforting weight in his hands, its power cell nearly depleted. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something ancient and metallic that clung to the back of his throat. He'd seen the ruins of 100 dead worlds, but this one was different. It felt watched, not by ghosts, but by something vast and ancient and deeply, terrifyingly alive. A low thrum vibrated through the soles of his boots, a frequency that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his bones. It was the same sound that had torn his team apart, a psychic scream that had driven them mad, forcing them to turn their weapons on each other. Kalen had been the only one who could fight it, whose stubborn, human mind had refused to break. He didn't know why. He just knew that to stop moving was to die. So he moved, deeper into the labyrinthine city of the dead, praying he could find a way out before the thing that was hunting him finally cornered him. The Leviathan was not a creature of flesh and blood in the way Kalen understood it. It was a consciousness, a psychic entity that had coalesced around the geothermal vents deep beneath the planet's crust, a being of pure thought and pressure that had outlived its creators. It communicated not with words, but with resonances, with the very fabric of space-time. And it was lonely, so profoundly, cosmically lonely that its loneliness was a physical force, a gravity well of despair that could tear a lesser mind apart. Kalen felt it as a pressure behind his eyes, a chorus of silent screams that promised an end to all pain, all struggle, all existence. It was an offer of oblivion, wrapped in the guise of peace. He gritted his teeth, the taste of blood sharp in his mouth. He wasn't like the others. He didn't want peace. He wanted to fight. He wanted to live. He raised his rifle, not at the creature he couldn't see, but at the air itself, at the very source of the oppressive thrumming. He pulled the trigger. The shot was a deafening crack in the silent tomb, a burst of pure, defiant noise that ripped through the psychic field. For a moment, the thrumming faltered. The pressure eased. In that moment of clarity, Kalen saw it, not with his eyes, but with his mind, a fleeting image of a vast, dark shape moving through the planet's molten core, recoiling from the sudden, violent intrusion. He had heard it. He had actually heard it. And in that moment, Kalen knew he had found a way to fight back. The ruins stretched on, a silent testament to a civilization that had mastered the very laws of physics only to be undone by the loneliness of their own planet. Kalen walked for what felt like days, his path illuminated by the faint, bioluminescent glow of crystalline flora that pulsed in time with the planet's slow, geological heartbeat. He was no longer just running. He was hunting. He had learned the rhythm of the Leviathan's presence, the subtle shifts in the ambient pressure that signaled its approach. He was a predator stalking a predator, a tiny mammal daring to challenge a god. He found the remnants of the civilization that had first befriended the Leviathans, or perhaps had been consumed by them. Their records were etched onto crystalline data slates, their language a complex tapestry of light and sound. Kalen, a linguist by trade, had spent years deciphering dead languages, but this one was different. It wasn't just a code, it was a song. He found a slate that depicted a ceremony, a ritual where the alien priests had linked their minds with the planetary consciousness, not to dominate it, but to understand it. The images showed a state of symbiosis, a harmony between the biological and the geological. But the final slate was different. It showed a schism, a great tearing in the collective consciousness. A faction had sought to sever the bond, to isolate the planet from its own soul. The result had been cataclysmic. The Leviathan had awoken from its shared dream, and its loneliness had become a weapon. Kalen stared at the image of the fractured planet, a cold dread settling in his gut. The humans hadn't come to salvage technology. They had stumbled into a war that was older than their species, a war between a god and its own shattered mind. The Leviathan's attack came without warning. One moment, the ruins were silent and still. The next, the very air was ripped apart by a psychic vortex. Kalen was thrown from his feet, his rifle skittering away across the crystalline floor. The pressure was immense, a physical force that threatened to crush him into dust. He heard the screams of his long-dead teammates, not as memories, but as fresh, present torments, their voices echoing in the confines of his skull. "Give in," the voice whispered, a chorus of 1,000 despairing souls. "It is easier to be nothing than to be this." The ground beneath him cracked, and glowing fissures spiderwebbed across the plaza, venting steam that burned his lungs. He saw it then, not as a shape, but as a distortion in reality, a tear in the fabric of the world through which glimpsed of impossible geometry and starless void. The Leviathan was no longer just a presence. It was here, manifesting its power to erase him. Kalen scrambled backward, his hands raw and bleeding, but the vortex was expanding, the pressure building to an unbearable crescendo. He closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in focus. He thought of his training, of the drills that had taught him to function under extreme duress. He thought of the stubborn, pig-headed refusal of his ancestors to simply lie down and die. He opened his eyes, not at the vortex, but at the ground. He saw the crystalline flora, pulsing in time with the planet's heartbeat. He had an idea. It was insane, suicidal, but it was all he had. He began to hum. The hum was not a melody. It was a frequency, a raw, ugly sound scraped from the depths of his own human stubbornness. He matched it to the pulsing of the bioluminescent crystals, a dissonant counter-rhythm to the planet's natural song. The effect was immediate and violent. The psychic vortex stuttered. The Leviathan's chorus of screams faltered, replaced by a note of confusion. Kalen poured everything he had into the hum, his throat raw, his vision blurring. He was not just making noise. He was imposing his own reality onto the alien one. He was a virus in the system, a glitch in the code. The crystals around him began to glow brighter, their light intensifying, pushing back against the oppressive darkness. The ground trembled, not with the Leviathan's power, but with a new, competing force. The vortex shrank, collapsing in on itself with a sound like a breaking mirror. The pressure lifted, replaced by a sudden, ringing silence. Kalen slumped to the ground, gasping for air, his body screaming in protest. He had won the exchange, but the battle was far from over. He had proven he could fight back, could disrupt the Leviathan's control. But he couldn't win a war of attrition. He needed to understand. He needed to find the source of the planet's original harmony, the key to the symbiosis the ancient aliens had once achieved. He needed to find the heart of the world. The path to the planet's heart was a vertical shaft, a wound in the earth that descended into crushing darkness. Kalen rappelled down, the only light the beam of his helmet and the faint, pulsing glow of the crystals that lined the shaft walls. The deeper he went, the stronger the thrumming became, a physical pressure that vibrated through his bones and made his teeth ache. The air grew thick and hot, tasting of sulfur and molten rock. He passed the skeletal remains of the ancient aliens, their petrified forms fused with the crystalline walls, forever locked in a silent embrace with the planet they had tried to save. They hadn't been destroyed by the Leviathan. They had chosen to become part of it, to merge their consciousness with the planetary whole in a final, desperate act of communion. Kalen felt a profound sense of awe and sorrow. These were the beings who had befriended the monster, who had offered themselves as anchors to the Leviathan's sanity. And it hadn't been enough. The loneliness had been too great, the schism too deep. He finally reached the bottom, a vast cavern illuminated by a sea of molten magma. In the center of the sea, floating on a raft of solidified crystal, was the source of the thrumming. It was not a creature, but a machine. A colossal, crystalline resonator, pulsing with a soft, blue light. This was the anchor, the focus point for the planetary consciousness. And it was dying. The resonator was failing. Its once steady pulse was now erratic, flickering like a dying star. Kalen approached cautiously, his boots sinking slightly into the warm, glassy surface of the raft. The air was thick with the psychic residue of 1,000,000 years of consciousness, a tapestry of thoughts, emotions, and memories that threatened to overwhelm him. He saw flashes of the alien civilizations rise and fall, their moments of joy and triumph, their final, desperate act of unity. He felt the loneliness of the Leviathan, a vast, echoing emptiness that had existed long before the aliens had ever arrived. It was the loneliness of a universe that had forgotten itself. The resonator was a bridge, a translator between the biological mind of the Leviathan and the geological soul of the planet. Without it, the Leviathan was adrift, its power untethered and its rage unchecked. Kalen knew what he had to do. He couldn't repair the alien machine. He didn't understand its principles. But he could do something else. He could use his own humanity as a new anchor. He could offer the Leviathan not the peace of oblivion, but the stubborn, noisy, defiant persistence of life. He placed his hands on the cool surface of the resonator. He closed his eyes and opened his mind, not to receive, but to broadcast. He poured his own consciousness into the machine, his memories, his fears, his relentless, idiotic will to live. He became a beacon of human noise in the silent, lonely cosmos. The connection was instantaneous and agonizing. Kalen's sense of self dissolved. He was no longer just a man in a cavern. He was the planet, the magma, the crystals, and the Leviathan all at once. He was the weight of eons, the loneliness of a god, and the fragile, fleeting spark of a single, stubborn life. He felt the Leviathan's consciousness not as an enemy, but as a wound, a gaping hole in the fabric of being that had been bleeding for millennia. The ancient aliens had tried to fill it with their own minds, but they had been too few, too fragile. Kalen was different. He was a paradox. His mind was small and limited, yet his will was iron. He was a whisper in a hurricane, but his whisper refused to be silenced. He broadcast his own consciousness, a chaotic, messy stream of human thoughts, the taste of coffee, the memory of sunlight, the frustration of a bad day, the fierce love for a world he had never seen. It was not a song of harmony, but a cacophony of life, a raw, unpolished noise that the Leviathan had never known. The entity recoiled, not in anger, but in shock. It had known only silence and loneliness. Now, it was bombarded with the vibrant, chaotic reality of another. The psychic pressure in the cavern lessened, the erratic flickering of the resonator steadied. A new pulse, a deeper, more complex thrum, began to emanate from the machine. It was the sound of a conversation, not a monologue. Kalen had not defeated the Leviathan. He had finally given it something it had been missing for an eternity, a reason to listen. When Kalen finally pulled his hands from the resonator, he was changed. The cavern was no longer a place of terror, but of profound, humming peace. The Leviathan was still there, a vast presence in the back of his mind, but it was no longer hostile. It was curious. It was watching him, observing the strange, persistent spark of humanity that had dared to engage with it. He felt a new connection to the planet, a symbiotic link that allowed him to sense the flow of magma, the growth of crystals, the very heartbeat of the world. He was no longer just a visitor. He was part of the system. He made his way back up the shaft, the journey a silent communion with the planet that had tried to kill him. When he emerged into the ruins of the alien city, the purple sky above seemed different, less threatening, more alive. He walked for hours, his path guided by an instinct he didn't understand. He found the wreckage of his dropship, crushed and useless. But nearby he found something else, a small, crystalline obelisk, pulsing with the same light as the resonator. As he approached, it projected an image, not of the ancient aliens, but of a new form. A hybrid being, part crystalline machine, part biological Leviathan, existing in a state of perfect, symbiotic balance. It was a vision of the future, a future that was now possible. The Leviathan was not just a monster. It was a guardian, waiting for the right kind of key to unlock its potential. Humanity, with its stubborn, noisy refusal to accept the silence of defeat, had proven to be that key. Kalen sat on the edge of a shattered plaza, watching the twin suns of the alien system dip below the horizon, painting the ruins in hues of orange and violet. He was no longer the sole survivor of a failed mission. He was the first ambassador of a new alliance. The Leviathan was silent now, its psychic presence a calm, observable hum in the back of his mind, like the warmth of a distant star. He had not tamed it. He had not conquered it. He had simply refused to let it be alone. And in that refusal, he had found a friend. He pulled out a small, data slate, its surface cracked and scratched. He began to record his log, his voice rough but steady. Entry 7. The entity is no longer an adversary. It is a partner. The loneliness has been replaced by dialogue. It's not what I expected. It's not what anyone would expect. We came to this dead world to scavenge its technology, to find a weapon, an edge in the galactic arms race. Instead, we found a god. And we found that the most powerful weapon we have isn't a laser or a bomb. It's the simple, maddening, unkillable refusal to give up. The Leviathan was defeated by noise. Not the noise of war, but the noise of life. We didn't befriend the most dangerous species in the universe. We reminded it what it was like to be alive. He paused, looking out at the silent, glowing city. And in doing so, we may have just saved ourselves. He closed the slate, the soft click echoing in the quiet ruins. The work was just beginning. The universe was a vast and lonely place, and humanity was finally learning how to make some noise.